In this video, I'm going to share with you a radical new approach to overcoming social anxiety, which actually works. But before we get into any of that, let me tell you a little bit about myself and my story with social anxiety. My name's Ed Barton, and I'm now a professional anxiety coach. But I struggled with all kinds of anxiety and mental health problems for decades and decades throughout my life. It started off when I was very young, and it got worse and worse as my years progressed. But to understand the full background of my situation, I need to take you back a little bit further, right back into my mum's history and my dad's history. My mum had a difficult life. On the outside, they were an upper middle class, well-to-do family. Her mum ran a clothes shop in the Midlands in England. Her dad was an Irishman who worked in advertising, but he was sexually abusive towards my mum. He was sleeping with the nanny, and he abruptly left the family when my mum was just 12 without saying anything to anybody. He just mysteriously left one day. And my mum was left to be brought up by her mother, who was very obsessed about social appearances. She was a kind of society woman, and she was also very narcissistic. My mum told me one story where she brought her first boyfriend back to the house to introduce her to her mum. And my grandmother said, "Okay, great, you go to the shop and buy some drinks for us." And then when my mum came back about 10 minutes later, she found her mother already on top of her boyfriend on the couch making out with him. So there was crazy, narcissistic, emotional abuse going on in the family behind these closed doors in a kind of well-to-do 1950s family. But my grandmother had to bring up 3 children on her own in the 1950s, which was pretty unusual. And she was a very strong, iron-willed woman, a kind of Victorian Scotswoman. And she was very intimidating. She was tall and big physically. And I remember being super scared of her when I was younger, and my mum also picked up that from her mum. So my mum became a kind of very iron woman and was very intimidating and scary and quite Victorian in her outlook. But from a young age, my mum developed a lot of anxieties. She was naturally shy, and then she was molested by her father. She was dominated by this narcissistic mother. So she really started to develop a lot of problems, and she took a lot of this out on her 3 children. I had 2 brothers. One of them died of a drugs overdose when he was 26 because he had deep mental problems. He had a lot of anxiety, a lot of social anxiety, and he died of a heroin overdose when he was 26. My middle brother also had a lot of psycho-emotional problems, and he was never really able to get fully established in life, and he had a lot of trouble with social anxiety, forming relationships with people, and general levels of health anxiety and all kinds of neurosis. And my mum told me that growing up, she developed a lot of anxiety and a lot of social anxiety. She would absolutely fall apart if she had to return things in a shop. She would get so nervous about that. She told me that sometimes as an adult, she would see people that she knew, and then she would like jump into a doorway and hide from people if she saw people on the street because she just didn't want to have a conversation with them. One time I was hanging my washing out outside my apartment, and she said, "Oh, I never would have had the nerve to do that because I would have felt that everybody in the block of flats was watching me." And that's when I told her, well, that's obviously social anxiety, but they didn't have the vocabulary for that in the 50s and 60s when my mum was growing up. So I absorbed a lot of this from my mum. I was close to my mum. I was actually emotionally enmeshed with them. She had a very toxic, codependent relationship with my father, because you can imagine a young girl who's been abused by her father and abused by her mother. She's not really going to go out into the dating marketplace and be able to form very healthy relationships with people. So she had a very volatile relationship with my dad. There was constant threat of divorce, constant argument in the house. So I grew up super insecure. And on my dad's side of the family, he was from a very poor family in the northern Midlands of England. His father used to work on a farm, and he would plough the ground with a Shire horse. This was before they even had tractors or anything. And his mum was a domestic helper. So they were super poor. And my dad grew up with a lot of insecurities about money. They didn't have running water. They never had a telephone. His father never owned a car. He always cycled everywhere his whole life. So my dad grew up with a lot of insecurity around status, around material possessions. And he was also abandoned by his mum. And this is, again, in the days before they had vocabulary like postpartum depression, but she gave him up to an aunt when he was very young. So he grew up thinking that this aunt was his mother, and then when his mum came back to claim him, he thought that he was being abducted by a strange woman. He didn't know that was his mum. So he grew up with all kinds of psycho-emotional problems, attachment issues, abandonment issues. So as I got older, I was only able to understand this, right? But my point of telling you this is that if you've got social anxiety, you don't need to have an alcoholic father. You don't need to have a sexually abusive mother. You don't need to have violence. You don't need to have lack of wealth or resources in your family. Your damage can be very subtle. The psycho-emotional abuse can be very subtle. It can be unseen. Both my parents were middle-class teachers. My dad was the head teacher of a special needs school. On the surface, we were a kind of struggling lower middle-class family, but behind closed doors, there was all kinds of emotional incest, enmeshment. Like I said, I was dragged into my parents' relationship. I had to get my dad to call an ambulance for my mum when I found her overdosed and he wasn't doing anything and she was obviously unconscious. So when I was 10 years old, I had to tell my dad to call the ambulance, and he was asking me for marriage advice, relationship advice when I was a kid. What should I do with your mum? How do we deal with this? She was dragging me into the relationship. So I was getting so screwed up from a young age. And I'm telling you this because if you've got social anxiety, this is what people don't tell you. It goes deep. It's not about squirting some lemon juice in some water and drinking it, or pulling on your earlobe, or taking magnesium before bedtime. It's not about that. It's not some crap that you see on TikTok. This goes so deep to the root of your upbringing and who you are and the experiences you've had growing up and the bullying and the low self-esteem. It goes to the core of who you are because it's about how you move around in the universe, how you move around in society. And when you're okay with yourself, you can go anywhere and be happy. But there's reasons that you don't feel that, and it goes really, really deep, and you need to understand that. So by the time I was 10, I had OCD. I had an obsession that I had something stuck in my throat, so I was constantly going this kind of anxiety, which is a well-known form of anxiety of having something stuck in the throat. At 10 years old, I developed intense blushing, which lasted from the age of 10 right up until I got my problems handled. So it went on for about 20 years, extreme blushing in situations. I had psychosomatic illnesses, like I would develop mystery glandular fever where they couldn't find the cause of it, but it was all to do with stress, especially if I had to socialize. And my problems were getting ingrained into me from a very young age. This led to tons of avoidance behavior and then later addiction issues, substance abuse. My mother is a recovering alcoholic. There was substance abuse in the family. As I said, my brother was a heroin addict. My middle brother also abused a lot of substances because these go hand in hand. When you have anxiety, when you have psycho-emotional abuse in your background, you have chronic low self-esteem, you have toxic shame, you have a lot of cognitive distortions. Your way of interpreting the world is super skewed, it's warped, it's unhealthy. You start medicating with drugs, with alcohol. You're self-soothing through masturbation. I became a chronic masturbator from a very young age because I didn't even know what that was at that time. Obviously, I was starting like 5 years old. It's self-soothing, right? I had a deep emptiness inside me because we were living in financial chaos, emotional chaos. My parents were separating. There were extramarital affairs. There were suicide attempts. My brother was put into a foster home. There was all kinds of madness going on around me, and I just had this deep insecurity and need for reassurance and for soothing. This also leads on to other stuff later on in your life around attachment issues. You start to have anxious attachment styles or avoidant attachment styles. So the point I'm trying to hammer home is like you need to understand all this. Like if some GP just tells you, yeah, just get on medication, have a 6-week CBT course, it doesn't go far enough. That's what drives me mad about all of this. And I've been running this YouTube channel for years, and I've had comments over the years like, oh, what do you think about this supplement? Should I take ashwagandha? What about 5-HTP? What about, like, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, taking a supplement is not going to get to the root cause of these problems, which I said, cognitive distortions, the way you perceive reality, the way you perceive yourself, paranoia, low self-esteem, toxic shame. It's about who you are as a person. It's a whole being problem. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So forget the gimmicks, forget the quick fixes. I went to Peru. I took ayahuasca 8 times. I spent tens of thousands of dollars on therapy, which didn't work. I went and did every possible thing you could imagine. Hypnotherapy, acupuncture, massage, like anything I could to try and relax myself and get rid of this constant uneasiness and anxiety in my body. But that wasn't it. That's not how you do it. So what I want to share with you here is the whole system which I devised, which is about changing yourself, transforming yourself, okay, from the bottom up. And there are 4 foundational steps, 3 core pillars, and then a capstone. It's a kind of structure which I've talked about before. The foundations you have to get in place. This is non-negotiable, right? The problem with social anxiety is because it goes so deep to the root of who you are, you have to change as a person. Like, I had to change everything. And I'll tell you, I was so self-conscious and so insecure and had such low self-esteem, I wouldn't even post a picture of my own face on Facebook until I was 32 years old. And prior to that, all I would post is sarcastic little comments and stuff like that because I thought I was cool and pessimistic and alternative. And I didn't realize that was just turning people off me even more. Prior to this, it took place at 32, my big transition, the start of my whole transformation. And it has to be a transformation as far as I'm concerned. Doing some superficial piecemeal kind of approach or therapy does not work. This is what also frustrates the hell out of me about people talking about social anxiety. It's all band-aid solutions. You have to change. When you're confident and feel good in yourself and happy in your own skin, you feel fine. Social anxiety disappears. When you're high vibration, when you're positive, when you're optimistic, when you have options and things going on in your life and you're excited about life and you see the miracle that life is and you're living on that level and that plane, social anxiety disappears because you are hopeful, you are excited, you are happy to be alive, and people are attracted to that, and you don't give a damn what people think about you. It's this positive energy pushes all of that out of the way. So this system has only been formalized in retrospect because at the time I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't realize the steps I was going through. It was just happening organically. But what I started to do was I started to exercise, and this is a non-negotiable for me. If you want transformation, you have to transform your body, right? As far as I'm concerned. When you start exercising, and if you're male watching this, get a physique that you want and you're actually putting on a bit of muscle mass, and if you're female, get a physique that you're proud of, that you feel happy about, because that process of sculpting a physique that you are proud of changes everything as far as I'm concerned. And not just from the self-esteem aspect. Your hormones are better regulated, your circulation is better, you're releasing endorphins. It's real, it's a physiological response. And prior to this, I'll show you some pictures. I was so pasty, I knew nothing about food, nothing about diet. I scorned all of that. I thought gyms were for vain, muscle-bound, mainstream idiots. And I always fancied myself as a pseudo-intellectual, someone from the underground, someone from the counterculture. I smoked a lot, I took a lot of drugs, I wanted to be a kind of like bohemian, artistic poet kind of guy. I hated all of that muscle-bound gym culture crap. That was not for me. But I tell you, it's what changes everything, right? Get in killer shape, get a physique that you are proud of. So you look in the mirror and you're like, hell yeah. Oh damn, yeah, I put on a bit of muscle mass, I'm in great shape. You want to be flexible, you want to be fit, as in you can run, and you want to be strong as well. That's a prerequisite for a good life, not just for overcoming social anxiety. I'm 43 now, I'm in the best shape I've ever been in. I'm 85 kilos, I have lean muscle mass. I can go out any day of the week and run 10, 20, 30 kilometers. I can swim, I can do triathlon. I'm more flexible than I was when I was a teenager because I put a lot of time into that, especially when I was in the monastery in Japan. So get your exercise in, get this sorted. This is the foundation step. Next, this leads to the second foundation step, which is your diet. Because when you have worked out, you're invested now in your health and you will naturally want to eat well. Trust me, there's a behavioral sequence to this. And as I say, I only figured this stuff out in retrospect. It was just happening organically for me. Once I'd gone to the gym, I was like, oh, hang on, I don't think I want to eat all that greasy fried pork and stuff that was available to me in Beijing where I was living at the time, and all that white rice. I started to look into like, what do you need post-workout? And I started to get my diet really dialed in. I started to eat really well. And also because if you start to work out and you want to put on muscle mass and get the kind of physique that you want, all of the literature will tell you that 70% of your gains are made from your diet. So you naturally start paying attention to your diet and nutrition. There's no point working out if you're not dialing in your diet as well. So those go hand in hand. So I got my diet on point, and then that led on to the next step. And again, I didn't think this out, this just happened. I would come back from the gym, I'd been doing 80 kilo squats, whatever it was, heavy lifts. And I just found like by 8, 9 o'clock, I was getting super tired. And I didn't know then this is because of the release of adenosine and all these neurochemical aspects that were coming into play. But I just knew I felt very tired. Whereas before I would stay up very late scrolling, doom scrolling, jacking off on the internet, whatever it was. Now I was tired, I would go to bed. And the most amazing thing was that sometimes the alarm would go off the next day and I would have to think like, hang on, where am I? What day of the week it is? Oh yeah, it's Tuesday, I'm in Beijing, I work in the embassy, right, I've got to get up and go to work. Whereas before I would wake up fitfully all through the night, wake up feeling worse in the morning than I had when I went to bed. And now it was different. I remember lying there in Beijing and I would wake up and you sort of feel yourself drifting back up to consciousness sometimes, and you'd hear like birds outside. And it's just this really nice feeling of coming up from a deep sleep rather than that superficial, often caffeine affected, jittery sleep that I'd been so used to. The fourth foundational step of this structure is something which I've added in later on, and this is because of my time as a monk in Japan. And in Japan, they put an emphasis in Zen training on three things: posture, breathing, and mind. So because our posture is screwed up from such a young age, we don't breathe properly. We normally breathe from the clavicle. It's a clavicular breathing. We don't breathe from the abdomen. And this has such a big effect on your mind. You can actually hack your sleep immediately after watching this video just by doing abdominal breathing and breath holds. It really works. So breathing is the gateway to the subconscious mind. In Japan, I learned the importance of posture and breathing and how this affects the mind. And also just resetting your nervous system, because these foundational steps are all about just getting to baseline. We are basically like zombies at the moment. We're so unnatural in the way that we live. You have to do these 4 steps to get to zero, just to actually get to the starting line. Then we can start building on top of that. So you need to reset your nervous system through correcting posture, correcting your breathing, nasal breathing, abdominal breathing. You can do breath holds. Try and get rid of so much social media, get rid of stimulants, get rid of blue light before bed, all of these things. So it's about trying to just de-stimulate the nervous system and just bring yourself back down to a healthy baseline. So the 4 steps: exercise, diet, sleep, and reset the nervous system. And now you're at ground zero. Now you're ready to start building on top of that. So the 3 core pillars of my approach to overcoming social anxiety are around reprogramming the mind. The 3 pillars are all about reprogramming the mind. And first there is identifying. You need to identify where you're at right now in your mindset. Secondly, you need to recondition. And thirdly, you need to apply and rewire. So the first pillar of the reprogramming stage is identifying, and you need to get down on paper and understand and get clarity on what is your internal narrative right now. How is your self-esteem? Where are you in terms of toxic shame? What are your cognitive distortions? What's your explanatory style? How do you interpret the world? How do you interpret events around you? If somebody doesn't reply to a text message immediately, does that mean they hate you and they've rejected you? Or does it mean that they probably just got a busy life and that they haven't got round to it yet? These are the absolute key factors in overcoming social anxiety, because one thing every social anxiety sufferer has in common is they have an awful mental operating system. It is ridden with virus and disease. And I know because I was there. It forms over years and years of psycho-emotional abuse, whether it's from the parents, whether it's from bullying, whatever it is. But trust me, my way of thinking and my way of interpreting reality was absolutely awful. And that led to outputs in my life also being awful. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your mental operating system and the quality of your thoughts. And mine were awful, so my life sucked as well. So in this first pillar, you need to identify where you're at. What do you say to yourself on a daily basis? What are you panicking about? What are you scared of? How do you interpret situations? All of these things, so you get clarity on that. The second pillar is all about reconditioning, and you want to look at new inputs, new ways of interpreting the world. You want to learn about new explanatory styles. You want to learn about how to overcome your toxic shame. You want to learn about changing your limiting beliefs. You want to substitute in new, healthier, rational, objective ways of interpreting the world. You want to learn different mindsets and different heuristic models for interpreting reality. For example, becoming a rational optimist instead of an emotional pessimist. Adopting an experimental mindset, which means thinking like a scientist, not taking everything so emotionally, just analyzing data points. Oh, I went to this party and I tried this way of opening a conversation. It didn't work, therefore I'm going to try something else. We take things out of the emotional realm and make it more rational and scientific. So in this middle pillar, there's lots of learning to be done. You can recondition your mind through new inputs. reading different types of books, learning about happiness, positive psychology, optimism, stoic mindset, all kinds of more positive mental operating systems to replace all of this disease-ridden, horrible, faulty, warped way that you've had of interpreting the world, and all of these unhelpful thinking styles, maladaptive thinking styles, cognitive distortions, and limiting beliefs. So the middle pillar is really a very exciting one, a very interesting one. My mind was really blown during this period because I was exposed to a lot of different things that I'd never even come across before. Things like evolutionary psychology, understanding how the mind is primed for anxiety but not happiness, and how we have to learn to be happy, to save a life, to learn gratitude, all of these positive emotional states. You learn how to practice these and how to adopt them. And then this moves on to the third pillar. The third pillar is all about rewiring your brain, and this happens through application. Now you've learned different ways of interpreting the world and different explanatory styles, and for example, you've learned an experimental mindset, just trying stuff and see what happens. Right, now you take it out into the world and you start exposing yourself to the things that you're so scared of, using these new mental models. I'm going to go up and say hi to 50 strangers and see what happens. My old belief was that I am unacceptable and loathsome and people just hate me on a visceral level. Now I'm going to take that model, I'm going to replace that with the idea that people are generally good and friendly, and if I say hi to strangers, some of them will respond. Right, I'm going to go out, try with 50 strangers, going to get those data points, see what happens. Wow, 32 out of 50 people gave me a smile and a wave and greeted me back. Therefore, my old belief that there is something inherently wrong about me, that I have some kind of toxic energy, that I'm some kind of alien, and that people don't appreciate me just because as soon as they see me, they're repelled by me. That belief has now been proven wrong. Okay, now this is starting to wire stuff up differently in my brain. I'm going to keep applying these new mental models. I'm going to keep going out and gathering data. And as you do, as you learn, this feedback leads to new beliefs, which leads to new actions, which leads to new feedback. So this is the process of taking the theory that we've learned in the reconditioning stage and applying it to reality and actually wiring up new pathways, new neural pathways in the brain, because these old fears, these things that scared you, these beliefs that you had are being shattered and changed and rewritten. And the final piece to this structure is the capstone, which is the self-actualization phase and leveling up all areas of your life. And again, I didn't know this was happening to me at the time. It all just happened organically. But in hindsight, I was able to formalize it into a coherent structure. And when I first went into the embassy, my self-esteem was so low. I worked in the embassy as a foreign policy analyst and a Chinese to English translator. And when I first entered, my self-esteem was so low that I saw everybody as above me in the dominance hierarchy. I was constantly sweating, constantly blushing, having meltdowns, panic attacks in all of the meetings. I had to get on 2 types of anti-anxiety medication just to cope there. And then once this process has started to evolve, in a very short amount of time, I already saw the faults in the system there. I felt that I was actually better than working there. I identified something else that I wanted to do. I developed a side hustle. And within a short period of time, I was already looking to actually leave the embassy once I'd started to grow in this way. What happened is I got involved with a group of entrepreneurs. I moved to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I set up my own business. I started thriving online in my own company. So I left this very steady, traditionally prestigious job in the embassy, completely leveled up all areas of my life. I started dating a lot. I changed my whole friend group. My finances radically improved. Everything about my life started to improve. And it can all be traced right back to that beginning of the process when I started to work on my body, build self-esteem with exercise. But as you go through the stages of this structure, you will then look around, and because you've grown in your own sense of self-worth, you have risen up this dominance hierarchy that you had in your head, and you think, hang on, why was I so scared of my boss? He's like 8 years younger than me. He's just a stuck-up little public school boy. I've had enough of this. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm sick of this aristocratic Oxbridge public school boy hierarchy. I'm going to set up my own business, carve out my own path in life. So you grow in confidence, grow in belief. And then I started to cut out all of the old people from my life, the people that I'd done drugs with before, that I'd gone binge drinking with before. I started to hang out with people who were into entrepreneurship, who loved working out, who were interested in personal development, developing their finances, developing their dating life, and things just naturally ascend in this virtuous cycle. So if you want to overcome social anxiety, follow this structure. It works. It's proven time and time again with me and my clients. And please stop following all this nonsense you see on TikTok, Instagram, All these things that are selling quick fixes, ayahuasca won't do it, pulling your earlobe won't do it, ashwagandha won't do it, squirting lemon juice in your eye won't do it. It's all about you, your whole way of being, and you have to start reprogramming that from the inside out and the outside in.